Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good afternoon to everybody. And it is a real pleasure for me to welcome you all to the event this afternoon, namely on the topic, the Nobel Peace Prize, Past, Present and Future. As you all know, the Nobel Peace Prize is one of the 5 prizes created by the Swedish industrialist Alfred Nobel. The others being in chemistry, in physics, physiology, medicine, and literature. As stipulated in Nobel's will, the Peace Prize is awarded to those who have, and I quote, done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations and for the abolition or reduction of standing armies and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. The first prize was awarded in 1901, and it has been awarded annually, with a few exceptions, which I think Asle will speak about, since then. Today, the Nobel Peace Prize is, I think, unparalleled, the most prestigious award there is in this field. Every year, the announcement of the Peace Laureates garners international attention and a spotlight on the work of the person or institute or organization that has received the award. Nobel Peace Laureates have included such notable figures and institutions as the International Red Cross, the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and Kofi Annan, to name just a few. Our discussion today will look at the past, present, and future of the Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Asle Toje, sitting here in front of me, a fellow Norwegian, is currently a member of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. He was formerly, until very recently, research director at the Norwegian Nobel Institute. Asle was educated at the universities of Oslo and Tromsø in Norway before going on to study international relations at Cambridge University, where he graduated in 2006 with a Dr. Phil. He was a Fulbright Fellow at Columbia University in a period 2004 to 2005, and was Research Associate at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies in 2007 and 2008. In 2008, Asle was also a visiting scholar at the European Union Institute for Security Studies in Paris. He has written several books on European and transatlantic politics and is a regular contributor to various Norwegian and international press. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon, Asle. It's an honor to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Terje. I must say it's a real pleasure to be here at the IPI and to be talking about my favorite topic. As Terje mentioned, I have been working for 8 or 9 years helping the Nobel Committee with supplying with the facts and the background checks necessary in the process of selecting Nobel Peace Prize laureates. And it came as somewhat of a surprise to me, I must admit, when the Norwegian Parliament pointed at me in February when selecting a new candidate for the committee. I am by far, I must admit, the youngest member of the committee, and this being Norway, and in Norway we try to be down to earth. So the youngest committee is the one who's got to get the sandwiches during meetings, and so that falls to me. Before starting, I have to come with a brief caveat. What happens in the committee chambers is governed by strict confidentiality, and I can't comment upon the discussions we have within the committee. Also, the committee members are bound by a no less than 50-year secrecy clause about the internal deliberations over Nobel Peace Prize candidates. So I can tell you about the internal ongoings up until 1968, but after that, I think I will have to restrict myself to referring to information that remains in the public domain. So, Let's start. Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel, born 1833, into the lower echelons of the Swedish aristocracy. His father was always on the run from the bailiffs, and he grew up not in poverty, but in poverty compared to his social class. Like Alfred, his father was an inventor and in many ways a dreamer. His father uprooted the family from Stockholm, took them to St. Petersburg, where the Nobel family thrived, finding themselves a niche in oil and armaments. I mention this because it's a popular misconception that Alfred Nobel was a pacifist. He was not. I've read many of the discussions. He wrote letters with a great many members of the peace movement, but above all, the grand old lady of the international peace movement, Bertha von Suttner. They corresponded in German, French, and in English. And while Bertha von Suttner was a pacifist, Alfred Nobel made it plain that he was more of a deterrence kind of guy. He believed that it would be unwise to abolish all armies. It would create too many incentives for those who retain a capacity for war. In 1895, as Terje mentioned, Alfred Nobel, having lived his life in a great many places, Alfred Nobel said that where I work is my home and I work everywhere. He was an industrialist, he was an inventor. He registered in his lifetime no less than 133 patents, the most famous of which he named after the Greek word for power, dynamitis, dynamite. He stabilized nitroglycerin and made a fortune, opening factories all over the world. 1895, he is in Sanremo in Italy, and he feels that his time on this planet is coming to an end. And he decides, and this is quite a special case, he decides to allocate almost all of his considerable fortune. When I'm talking to students about this, I compare him to a latter-day Bill Gates. He was an inventor, and he made his own business empire. He was an ideas guy, and he made a great fortune that he didn't want to pass on to the family. He was unmarried, had no children, but I can assure you that the rest of his family were surprised, to say the least, when they found out that this vast fortune was going to be sent out or divided amongst 5 awards, as Terje mentioned. So, revisiting the criteria outlined in Alfred Nobel's will of 1895, we have the person who has done the most in the previous year for the fraternity amongst nations, abolition or reduction of standing armies, and the promotion of peace congresses. After the court cases that followed the testament were done and the committee could start working in 1901, it's worth noting, and I think this is an important point, that from the very beginning, the Nobel Committee has taken what you might call a dynamic reading of Alfred Nobel's will. He says the person that in the past year has done the most. The first award was given to Henri Dunant, founder of the Red Cross, and the French peace activist and parliamentarian Frédéric Passy. Henri Dunant had resided in the past year in an old people's home in Switzerland. He had done very little for peace in the year that had passed. And I think this is an important point because over the years, these 3 criteria have been understood by the Nobel Committee in the broadest terms to create 3 sort of main venues for Nobel Peace Prizes. One is peace mediation, those who go in to end conflicts. Another one is arms control in the broad terms, both reduction and abolishment, and non-proliferation. And third, and this is the more broad category, perhaps you could call what he calls fraternity amongst nations. Maybe we can say has been interpreted to those who work for creating the preconditions for peace, as we know. Terje Rødrasjen was nice enough to mention the Oxford Dictionary of Contemporary History's listing of the Nobel Peace Prize as the most prestigious award in the world. And I can assure you that the members of the committee, we take our charge very seriously. But a question must be asked. In a world where there are, and we keep track of this at the Norwegian Nobel Institute, there are roughly 200 peace prizes in the world, several of which come with a greater financial reward than the more or less $1 million that comes with the Nobel Peace Prize. So why is it that the Nobel Peace Prize has achieved this elevated status? Well, surely it has something to do with age, let's be honest. The Nobel Peace Prize goes back to 1901, and no other peace prizes can claim anything similar. I do believe also that the Nobel Peace Prize captures the imagination of humans all over the world. The Nobel Peace Prize cuts across all those things that divide us: national boundaries, socioeconomic boundaries, cultural boundaries, religious boundaries, and points to a deep urge and longing that unites us as human beings, the longing for peace, the wish not to live in conflict. I think that is something that unites us all. Perhaps it might be said, to follow up on to use Abraham Lincoln's term, is a celebration of the better angels of our nature. And in that sense, I think it says something very nice about us as a species, that the most prestigious award in the world is a peace prize. I think that is hopeful in a sense. But I think also perhaps the main reason why the Nobel Peace Prize stands head and shoulders above all other similar awards is the laureates. The history of the Nobel Peace Prize comprises a great many inspiring individuals and institutions. And I would like to take this moment to remember Kofi Annan, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001 alongside the United Nations. Kofi Annan, who I had the good fortune of meeting on 2 occasions, he wasn't a saint. I think so. Sometimes you read in the newspapers that you get a sense that he was almost a saintly figure. He was not, but he was a good man, and his efforts for peace and reconciliation around the world, although his track record was not perfect, but very good and worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize, is something that I think, well, at least for me, to hear of his passing gave me great sorrow, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about him in these past days. When we look back at the history of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I'm just going to try to give you sort of my academic view, I have the fortune that I was the research director at the Nobel Institute, so I do know a fair bit about the history of the Nobel Peace Prize. So what I'm about to say here is my view. It's not the view of the committee or anyone else, but this is just the view of somebody who's spent more time in the archives reading about the Peace Prize than most others. I think that when you look at the Nobel Peace Prize, from 1901 up until 1914, it's a very clear focus in the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prizes is arbitration. This belief that peace in the international system is best taken care of through arbitration. Of course, as we know, World War I took much of the wind out of the sails of the arbitration agenda. Then, in the interwar years, the Nobel Peace Prize focuses quite strongly on the League of Nations, all the way up until 1940. Terje was mentioning that there have been some years that the Nobel Peace Prize has not been awarded, has happened on 19 occasions, and sort of the biggest chunks in those are obviously during the World Wars. We don't hand out peace prizes during the World Wars. Last year that it was not awarded was, I believe that was, 1972. So the committee is not obliged to award a Nobel Peace Prize each year. If we can't find a suitable candidate, We will just let the money roll over to the next year. So up until World War II, arbitration and the League of Nations, those were the two sort of big themes for the Nobel Committee. Both of them give us an indicator of, I think, the broader theme that unites the Nobel Peace Prize all the way up until today. It's a striving for a better organized international community. After World War II, the United Nations take over much as a unifying role, the red thread, if you will, through the Nobel Prizes up until the end of the Cold War. After the Cold War, we see a spread. The Nobel Peace Prize visits a more diverse range of topics than it had in the years previous. We see new agendas, the environment agenda, the human rights agenda, all coming to the fore. And we see that the committee increasingly, more than in the past, try to allow want the Peace Prize to be a thumb on the scales in ongoing issues, ongoing conflicts, to be an encouragement to bring about a change that the Nobel Committee sees as beneficial to peace. I think that the Peace Prize from 2 years ago to Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos is a good example of that. I had the good fortune of spending time with President Santos and his family when he was in Norway, and I was talking to his son, and he was saying that they had brokered this peace agreement, bringing the longest-running civil war in the Latin America, I think in the world, but certainly in the Americas, to an end. And they had been certain that once this agreement was put to a referendum, it would be a resounding yes. But inclement weather and huge rainstorms and a lot of other issues led to a surprising no in the referendum to the peace deal. There were issues with the deal that had been signed that many felt were too problematic. And the son says that we were in Cartagena and we were just so depressed and really questioning whether we were going to succeed with this. It seemed that the whole thing, we'd gotten so close, and then it unraveled just at the last hurdle when they got the phone call from Norway being told that President Santos had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And his son said that this filled his father with an entirely new purpose, that it really changed his view of the situation, and he buckled down and attacked the issue with renewed vigor. And the peace agreement came into place. It's not perfect in Colombia, and there's much work that remains to be done, but I remind you of my initial, where I started, this longing that I think that is shared by all, that peace is better than war. Very few of us would choose to live in war. I know that there are probably a fair few questions that you here in the audience might have about the Nobel Peace Prize, and so I think I'm just going to cut my initial remarks short and give the mic to you guys. I'll try and answer any questions that you might have, but keep in mind my small caveats. I have to remain loyal to the committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Asle, for a very learned and very comprehensive overview of past, present, and future perspectives for the Nobel Peace Prize. I know there must be tons of questions in the audience here. I can already see hands coming up. But I wanted to ask you one question before I open the floor. I have in front of me here statistics over all the Nobel Peace Prizes and all the Nobel Prizes and also the Nobel Peace Prize. And there is a striking pattern in the numbers. That is that by and large it's only the North who have, not only, but mostly the North who have got all the prizes, and the gender balance is not very good. How would you comment?
The Nobel Committee, we meet in a wonderful chamber that has been kept entirely intact as it was built in 1904. And on the walls of that chamber, we have the pictures of all the Nobel Peace Prize laureates. And you're right. When you look at the beginnings, the Nobel Peace Prize predominantly goes to elderly white men with facial hair. That seems to be, and also quite a narrow segment of these. A strong preference for Northwestern Europe and North America, excluding Canada. Then from the 1930s, you see that you get a greater global presence. You get more people from the rest of Europe, from the rest of the Americas. But the great change, when you look at the photographs, a great change comes in the 1980s. You see ever more people represented from the entire world, from all corners of the world, and there are more women present. And just to tackle the question about gender balance, I think the Nobel Peace Prize is a child of its times. And if you look at other institutions and forums, this is the way the world was, unfortunately. For instance, when I mentioned that, up until World War I, it focused on Nobel Peace Prize focused on arbitration, and after World War I, the League of Nations. These were venues where there were preciously few women given any prominent places, and I think we just have to live with that and learn from that. But that's the way it is. That was the way the world was.
Thank you very much. I thought it was a difficult question, but it was also an excellent answer. May I now open the floor? I see several hands already. I will collect 2 or 3 questions and then turn back to Asle. Can you please state your name and affiliation when you take the floor? I will start on the second row.
Hi, Jonathan Granoff. I'm the United Nations representative for the World Summits of Nobel Peace Laureates. And I wanted to underscore one of your points, which was every year we have a summit of the Nobel Peace Laureates. And in order to support the process that you put into motion in Colombia, we brought 25 Nobel Peace Laureates there. And it was a huge national event with tens of thousands, public exposure and support. Recently, for example, I brought 4 Nobel Peace Laureates to the Middle East, to Bahrain, Presidents Willessa, de Klerk, and Jose Ramon Horta. So the work that you do gives space for civil society organizations to promote the principles that you stand for. And I think that's a point you didn't bring out that I think is extremely important, that you, by virtue of putting these values forward, you create an enormous amount of space. And there, by the way, there's a women's organization of women's Nobel Peace Laureate, which it was Jody Williams, Marie Corrigan McGuire, Betty Williams, et cetera, so who are trying to address this issue with passion and advocacy. So I just wanted to thank you and let you know that there's a lot of benefits that we don't even get to say thank you that often. So on behalf of that organization, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I will then move to the gentleman on the front row. I seem to recognize you.
Warren Hogue of IPI. I want to ask you, you obviously have a good sense of humor, and I wanted to try to get you to tell a story. And the story is the way people and governments lobby you to get their presidents named as Nobel Peace Laureates, as an example of how many people and how broad the reach is of people who consider themselves candidates for the Nobel Peace Prize. I would tell you that our current president thinks he is a candidate Nobel Peace Prize. How do people lobby you, and can you tell us some stories, and is it ever effective?
I thought that was a very good question. I will take one more intervention, before we turn back to Asle. I think the gentleman on the left here, and I will come back to you later.
Thank you. My name is Manik Mehta. I'm a syndicated journalist. Well, one of the aberrations of awarding the Nobel Peace Prize has been the exclusion of Mahatma Gandhi of India. He was a dedicated, non-violent struggler for peace, for independence, whereas you have been awarding this very coveted prize to less deserving candidates. Can you explain this discrepancy, please? Thank you.
I thought these were very good questions, all of them. Asle, you have a challenge.
I'll start with you, Mr. Mehta. Of course, there are omissions in the history of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I agree with you, no single omission is greater than the failure to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Mahatma Gandhi. I completely agree with you. All I can say, having studied the archives of the Nobel Committee, as far as I understand, it went like this. The Nobel Committee received the nomination for Mahatma Gandhi over several years. The consultant reports were favorable, but there was uncertainty about the division between East and West Pakistan and India and the role played by Mahatma Gandhi. They reached out to the British diplomacy and without, it was, I don't even think that it was more sort of whispers in London where they got signals that it might be better to wait for a year to see how this thing pans out. And in that year, Mahatma Gandhi was murdered. And it's a great omission, and I think this is the one and the biggest one in the list. There's nothing I can do more to say about that, other than the Indian laureate Kailash Satyarthi is a very good friend of mine, and I visited with him several times, and it's very good and interesting to see how Kailash Satyarthi is inspired by Mahatma Gandhi and seeks to carry forth the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. And I know this is not no great consolation, but I think at least it's worth noting. Warren about lobbying efforts. All right, I'll tell you a story, but I'll just remove all names and other facts. Okay, so. There once was a president who wanted the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Nobel Committee is served by 6 consultants, 6 professors. You know, like we need to have experts, we need to have language people who have regional experts, people who have law experts, people who are experts in very different fields pertaining to the Nobel Peace Prize. So, 2 of these experts were invited to this country. For academic purposes, but as they arrived, they understood that this was not sort of an academic trip. And the story we always tell at the Christmas party is that there were 2 professors, and one of them, they were taken then for different curriculum. One of them was invited to go to a fun park, like a Disney world, and the other one was taken to a brothel. So of course, none of them went, but we always find it great fun that how they judge the characters of the 2. And I think that I don't think any of them would have enjoyed either. But yeah, Jonathan Granoff, Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Yes, there are a great many events after the Nobel Peace Prize. I just came from a Nobel Peace Prize Summit forum in Minneapolis, where the students stole my book. And that is, I can assure you, I have no view of whether the Hawaiian kingdom still exists. But they stole my book and put their stickers on it. Great to engage with young people, worthwhile what you're doing, and we support it fully. I think it's brilliant. And of course, we don't demand it, but we do hope that the Nobel Peace Prize laureates will continue their good work. That is, of course, the hope of the committee, but we don't audit it. And therefore, we welcome all organizations such as yours that take upon themselves to harness this energy and bring it forward.
Thank you very much for responding with clarity. and also for sharing very entertaining stories with us. Can I now open the floor again? I think I will start with the lady there, and then I will go to the back. Can you please state your name and affiliation?
Angela
I seem
Kane.
to recognize you too.
Thank you, Angela Kane, a former long-time UN staffer and now in Vienna with the International Institute for Peace. I have a question, because when you consider the person or the group that is going to be nominated, do you ever think about the implications that it has across a broader spectrum? And I'm thinking particularly, having worked the last couple of years of my UN career in disarmament, still continue to do so, is when you gave the award to the nuclear ban, the ICAN, that had tremendous repercussions, tremendous shot in the arm to all of the NGOs, but maybe not as much liked by some member states who are against actually the nuclear ban treaty. And similarly, I remember that when the Peace Prize was awarded to Kofi Annan at the UN, that was just after we had spent a couple of years in a very difficult situation with Bosnia-Herzegovina, with Rwanda, where we were just really bad-mouthed all over the place. And that was a tremendous boost for not only Kofi Annan, but all of the UN staff. And that was very important to us. So is that something that you also take into account when you award the prize?
Thank you. Then I will go to the gentleman on my left at the back.
Thank you, Richard Jordan from International Council for Caring Communities. There are two important modifiers before the word congresses, holding and spreading. What are the qualities of a congress as opposed to a conference, and must there be a series of congresses in order for a congress to be awarded the prize? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then the lady at the very back, I'm coming to.
Good evening. No, good afternoon. My name is Lorena Rodriguez. I was working for the High Commissioner of Peace in the peace talks in Colombia for 4 years, the entire peace talks. And my question is also drawing on her question. What are the implications for the Nobel Peace Prize? Because when Juan Manuel Santos was awarded with the Peace Prize, maybe this was beneficial for him and his family, probably some members of the government, but victims and people in the ground with suffering the war every day, they didn't get any beneficial from this Peace Prize. So to what extent this Peace Prize really seeks to impact in some way processes of peace building or even post-peace accord, and if it's possible.
Thank you very much. And then we are now all turning to you again, Asle, to respond.
If you don't mind, I'll do it in the reverse order again. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your comments. I got to be honest with you. I think we shouldn't try and overburden the Nobel Peace Prize. Some people expect that the Nobel Peace Prize can create peace. It cannot. It can encourage and try to be a beacon, if you will, to get key actors to strive for peace. When it comes to whether the Nobel Peace Prize, in your words, didn't bestow any benefits on the people afflicted by this conflict, I have to disagree, because peace, and I'm not saying it created peace, but I do hope that it was a part of the tapestry, if you will. And I think peace is a great benefit to the people that have been harmed, and there are a great many victims of the conflicts in Colombia, and I do know that the underlying causes for the civil war have not yet been fully redressed or mended. All I have to say to that is that, and I know it's desperately unsatisfactory to answer this way, but it takes time, and sometimes the first road, the first step on the road towards positive peace, if you will, is to create negative peace, an absence of people shooting at each other, and that's I hope the Nobel Peace Prize in some way furthered that agenda. Richard Jordan on the peace congresses. The peace congresses was closely associated with Beata von Suttner, Alfred Nobel's longtime pen pal. He even asked her to marry her. He even asked her to marry him at one stage. They had a great partnership. They exchanged a great many letters. She wrote much more letters to him than he did to her, maybe because she kept asking him for money for her peace congresses. These peace congresses was a track that, much like arbitration, lost much of their oomph after World War I. This idea to have regular meetings, annual meetings, where worthy people, cerebral people would come together and discuss peace, was in some ways sort of taken over by the League of Nations and then later by the UN as the primary forus for those kind of endeavors. So I do believe that the Nobel Peace Prize has remained true to that article, having singled out both the League of Nations and the UN as on so many occasions. And I do believe that the underlying emphasis in this part of the testament is striving for a better organized world. This belief that a better organized world carries in it a greater promise for a more peaceful world. And that's a view that I personally share, and I believe that was a view that also Alfred Nobel subscribed to. Let's see. Then did I missed a question? What was the first one? Sorry, that was Angela Kane. Sorry, Angela. Sorry, I know Angela, so I only wrote Angela and then no more. Yeah. Angela was invited to participate as an expert on non-proliferation at the Nobel Peace Prize forum, symposium in Norway earlier this year. And the question that she asked me is a question that we discussed at great length, and the prize given to the international campaign to ban nuclear weapons. I can't comment on what the committee thought when they're discussing this. Well, primarily because I wasn't in the room. I don't know what they discussed. But I will tell you this: no single issue has been carried forth by the Nobel Committee more often than the work to rid the world of nuclear weapons. More than 10 prizes. Depends a little bit on how you count it. Are you going to count the Obama Prize as an anti-nuclear prize? The committee focused on that, on the Prague speech. More than 10 awards, and nuclear non-proliferation work falls in various categories. You have non-proliferation, so like not more nations getting nuclear weapons. You have arms control, to try not to get more of them. You have arms reductions, cut the numbers, and then you have the goal signed off by the P5 on several occasions, notably in the Non-Proliferation Treaty of '68, to rid the world of nuclear weapons. And this was the ambition of the international campaign to ban nuclear weapons, and they had chosen a different venue, a different style than past efforts, shunning high politics and trying to go the path that we'd seen had worked when it came to landmines and to chemical and biological weapons. All this is mentioned in the public text from the Nobel Committee. I think that's all I can say. I think that the prize to ICANN is unsurprising given the history of the Nobel Peace Prize. That's all I can say about that award.
Thank you very much. I took note that you said that the Nobel Peace Prize cannot create peace, but would you be of the opinion that the prestige of the prize would add gravitas and forcefulness to organizations and individuals who get the prize, so that can be helpful in their endeavor to create peace?
Well, that touches on a question that I didn't fully address from the audience about, and this is I guess I think that was the continuation of your question, Angela, about what follows after the Nobel Peace Prize? Do we give considerations to what impact this might have? Yes, we do. We give great weight to the personal security of laureates. Will this award risk the life of the laureate? This is an issue that we discuss. Will the laureate be able to, if it's an individual, how will the laureate likely be able to shoulder this? Because once you're a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, you're a Peace Prize laureate for life. It's going to be mentioned. It will be a talisman that you will carry around with you. We have to take that into consideration. Yes, we also consider the likely response by other actors involved in various processes. Will the Peace Prize lead to uniting or fragmentation? Is it going to be uniting or divisive? These are the issues that we discuss in the committee. And I think the way we work is kind of difficult to comprehend for non-Norwegians, because there are 5 members. We're nominated by Parliament. We roughly represent the political span in the Norwegian Parliament. So you will have your Social Democrats, you'll have your Conservatives, you'll have your Liberals, and you'll have people of various stripes. Pretty much a sort of mainstream breakdown of a Western democracy. And we make decisions through consensus. We don't vote. We try to persuade each other. So we sit around the table, and we put forth our best arguments to try and persuade each other. It's tiring, I can promise you. It's really tiring. It's an open-ended time horizon, so meetings can run for a great many hours. And if we can't decide, we just meet again, and we meet again until everybody have had all their questions and all their concerns lifted, and we have gone over it to a point where everybody feels comfortable standing behind the laureate. And it's not a venue of conflict. That is the weird thing. That is probably for non-Norwegians it's difficult to understand. But we try to be reasonable, we try to be charitable, and we try to be kind, and it actually works. I know I'm really surprised by it myself, but it's tiring and hugely rewarding. For myself, being a young member of the committee, I find it's daunting in a sense to have this role. I feel a great responsibility that comes with the Nobel Peace Prize, just because of what you alluded to in your question, Angela. The Nobel Peace Prize is not just a nice to have, a celebration of, who's a jolly good fellow or who's a jolly good woman. It's also a prize that reverberates, that has effects, and to think seriously about what those effects might be, positive and negative, is something that we take very seriously. Yes. Sorry, I went on a bit there, didn't I?
No, it's perfect. So what you're saying is that one cannot be stripped of the medal.
Thank you. Yes, I've been called up day and night over
Are you thinking
over
over
Aung San Suu Kyi. Let's be honest. Aung San Suu Kyi is an issue that is making a lot of people very unhappy that Aung San Suu Kyi is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And all I can say to that is that we don't revoke Nobel Prizes, not in any category. And that might change. It might change. All that has to do is that members of all the Nobel Committee and the Nobel Foundation can agree to change the statutes. But I'm not going to lie to you, I don't think that's going to happen. And I do think that I think you can understand why. Can I?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
You have plenty of time.
Over the years, there are popular and unpopular prizes. And when I started at the Nobel Institute, there was one award that would always be mentioned, especially by grown-ups, like a little bit older than me. It would be the Kissinger Award, 1973, that a lot of people would have very big problems with. But that's in Norway. But in other countries, other awards have been equally controversial. Going back to to the awards that I can actually discuss in detail. 1945, Gordon's Hall, British laureate, receives the Nobel Peace Prize. It later emerges that Hall, through his insistence on closed borders and restrictive immigration policies, refused entry into Britain of several thousand Jews who later perished in the Holocaust. That's problematic. That is problematic. The point I'm trying to make, dear friends, is that if we were to put forth such a principle, we would have to go back and start editing the entire history of the Nobel Peace Prize. And the history of the Nobel Peace Prize, I said, I only told half of the story. I was saying that the Nobel Peace Prize is the most prestigious award in the world because of the Norwegian Nobel Committee has gotten it right so many times. Some laureates have not stood the test of time as well as others, and I'm not going to name any of them. But I do think that if we all sat down and made a list of laureates that we felt that hadn't stood the test of time, some names would be the same, but a great many would vary. That's how history goes. I was surprised to see that now Nixon seems to be rehabilitated in the United States. Nixon has become you have the historians getting into it and saying that Nixon was actually not such a bad guy. He got a bad rap. Nixon got a lot of big important stuff right. For those of you who are a little bit older, will remember that they would have been very surprised that anybody would say that if you went back to this debate in the 1970s. We're imperfect creatures. Nuanced opinions is something that is not so easy for us when emotions are at play. Then we have a tendency to things have to be either white or black. And I think that with the benefit of hindsight, I think we get much more nuanced about laureates that lie further back, and that's when it comes to Aung San Suu Kyi. So I can say with certainty that the award is not going to be revoked, and we don't audit the laureates' future efforts. We're giving this award for things they have done, not things they are about to do. It would be very, very difficult if we went down that path.
Thank you very much again. Maybe it's inappropriate and unfair to ask, but it's too tempting. To your mind, what was the worst mistake the committee has done historically within the period you can talk about? I'll give you 5 minutes to think about it. Can I open the floor again? We will come back to it.
That was an awful question.
The very young gentleman here on the front row.
John Hirsch, IPI. First of all, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about the award to President Obama. And at the time, the award was given on the basis of what it was expected that he would do in the future, rather than what he had actually done. And there's not a criticism of President Obama at all, because I think he tried very hard. But of course, not everything panned out. So we have Libya, we have Syria, we have Iran. So given that background, what is your thought about awards given looking forward rather than looking directly at what somebody has actually, when he got the award, he had not achieved much. He'd become the president of the United States, but it was still at the very, very beginning of his administration. So can you offer some reflection on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I will then go to the gentleman on the second row here.
I'm Ambassador Anwar Chaudhry. I collaborate with the Global Movement for the Culture of Peace, and I worked many years at the United Nations. Firstly, thank you for referring to Kofi Annan as a saint. And in our personal conversations, I used to call him Saint Kofi. And I would like one word of appreciation to the Nobel Committee, I think, for its awards in 2011, giving to 3 women who stood up for peace and security in the world. And that Nobel citation mentioned a UN resolution, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women and peace and security in a big way. And as the initiator of that resolution in the Security Council, I feel very proud, and I keep on mentioning that in many of my speeches. And I believe that is the only UN resolution so specifically mentioned in any Nobel citation. And so I believe that it is very important to recognize the role of the UN also in promoting global peace and security. And I think UN's work in non-political, so-called outside the peace and security area is very important. Reducing poverty, reducing disease, promoting education, health is extremely essential to make a world peaceful place. So I do draw that attention. And I would also mention, in the context of the question made by Mr. Mehta, that next year is the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. It may be an occasion, as you award the Nobel Peace Prize in December, it may be good to have a special occasion to recognize his missed award and his most deserving award. And I think that will be wonderful. And I had a question, but Mr. Rod Larson had asked that about stripping Nobel laureates of their prize. And I think this is very relevant. As you talk about future of the Nobel Peace Prize, maybe that is a matter of thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I saw several hands here. The lady on the 3rd row.
Thank you so much for all the provided information. It is greatly appreciated. I am Bircan Ömer, and I represent the late millennium. I have a slightly different question that over the years, I'm originally from Turkey, including in Turkey, there has been a perception that the Nobel Prizes, including Nobel Peace Prize, this is the team here, it's being used, especially in the developing countries, by the Western countries' goal and purposes and ideology to change towards their goal using awarding the awardees in different names. This has been going on not only limited with Turkey. I run into this information and comments and discussion, not limited with Turkey. What is your thought and comment, and what do you do about this kind of perception to remove that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I saw another hand there. So the gentleman in the center, but on my left there.
I'm Andrew Tomlinson from the Quaker office at the United Nations, and thank you for this discussion today. I wonder if you might speak a little to the nominating process and who can nominate in what way. I know that the board of the American Friends Service Committee, who's the largest Quaker service organization, spends a lot of time each year on considering nominations for the prize. And on a personal note, I had been thinking about getting rid of this beard, and now realizing that facial hair is an important component for elderly northern gentlemen suggesting this.
Well, but you know, who knows? There might be sort of a revival.
Asle.
Andrew, all right, who can nominate for the Nobel Peace Prize? Well, obviously, Nobel Peace Prize laureates, obviously members of the committee, past members of the committee, members of national assemblies, members of government around the world, full professors of history, political science, and international law, judges at the International Court of Justice, and some other international courts. Yeah, I think that's sort of the main categories. They're all listed on the website. Yes, I did. I mentioned laureates and the boards of institutions that have received the Nobel Peace Prize. What we see is, I think it was easy to be on the committee in the past. You know, like in the interwar years, it would be routinely about sort of 7 or 8 nominations. This year we had 331 nominations. So the work for the committee, you know, brushing up on all these nominations is more time-consuming than it had been in the past. We receive nominations in a variety of ways. All you have to do, if you can nominate, is to send us an email if you want to, and say, "Hi, my name is Professor John Smith of the University of Excellence, and I would like to nominate so-and-so for the Nobel Peace Prize." That's all. That's the minimum. However, we now have developed a new website where those who nominate can go in and follow a relatively easy, it's like a bit like buying an airline ticket online. The thing is, we've had a problem in recent years, and this touches upon one of your past questions, Terje, of fake nominations that we get. Last year, we had to report to the police a nomination where a professor had nominated a controversial candidate. And when we reached out to this professor, as we always do, we always reach out to those who have nominated to confirm their nomination. He said, "I never heard about this. This has nothing to do with me." And it was somebody who'd just taken this person's business card, stapled it to a letter, and forged a signature, and hoped that it would pass through. So, you know, we do have procedures to weed these kind of things out. I'm really happy that we are getting ever more nominations, and I think it's a testimony to the globalization of the prize that we get ever more nominations from outside Europe and North America. You know, the balance of nominations are becoming ever more in sync with where people live around the world. You know, like a point that was made, you know, like about the gender balance in the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, if you were to take it from a political scientist, so, you know, the way I would see it is, how do women go, you know, when it comes to Nobel Peace Prizes, relative to how many women were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize? And on that score, women actually have a better chance of getting the Nobel Peace Prize than men. Because so few women were nominated, right? And now the best way, you know, like the best thing that anybody can do, you know, to bring an individual or an organization or individuals to the attention of the Nobel Committee is to nominate them. Nominations don't roll over. They have to be nominated each year. And I think that is something that I would encourage those who are eligible to nominate to do. And if you're not all eligible, you know, why not seek out somebody who is eligible and you can persuade of this being a good idea. I think often we find, and I certainly appreciated, those who nominate take the time to make the case for their nomination in a letter. We read every nomination. I have to tell you, like it's time-consuming, but very, very interesting because, you know, when it comes to some nominees, we can get dozens of nominations for the same individual, same institution, and it's very, very rewarding to read the various thoughts behind different nominations. It provides a much more nuanced picture and gives me a much better sort of entry value, you know, when going into discussions with the people, the other members of the committee. Yes. Madam, was that? I know, but your name? Birjan. Yes, yes. The perception that the Nobel Peace Prize is being used by Western powers to further Western values. No, no. The Nobel Peace Prize is yeah, I know. And I just have to say, as a member of the Nobel Peace Prize, we're not the representatives of any power. We're not the representatives of the Norwegian government. We're not the representatives of the West. We are the custodians of Alfred Nobel's last will and testament and trying to bring forth his vision into the world. That said, yes, the Nobel Peace Prize has favored democracy. It has. It has favored those who strive for the rule of law. Yes, it has. It has favored those who defend the freedom of speech. Yes. And I realize that in some certain quarters, these values, these classical values of the Enlightenment are controversial. And the Nobel Peace Prize is controversial. It's every year there is a great deal of controversy around the Nobel Peace Prize, and we don't hide. We don't hide our views. We stand behind the laureates and our decisions. And I think if you think that is some sort of Western ploy, maybe, but we don't. But I know that you don't. But I think it's proven that a better organized society and freedom fosters and helps internal and external peace. That is the scholarly consensus on that matter. I feel that we stand on pretty sound grounding, and I have to tell you that I'm much happier, standing in that camp than in any opposite camp. It would be much more comfortable for me. So no, I don't have any problems defending that. Ambassador Chaudhry, yes, like your second point about acknowledging Mahatma Gandhi, I don't think that's going to happen. In the last posthumous prize we awarded was to the UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld in 1961. Our statutes were changed in 1974. We don't award posthumous awards because that might have been, had we changed the statutes, that might actually have been an alternative to posthumously give Mahatma Gandhi the award, but that's not possible. I think this is just one of those. It's just a thread in the tapestry of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think we just have to console ourselves with it. That Mahatma Gandhi didn't receive the Nobel Peace Prize is an omission. Thank you for noting the 2011 Peace Prize to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and Tawakkol Karman and Lamar Bowie from Sierra Leone and from Liberia and from and Yemen. Yes, I think the focus and the plight the focus on women and women in peace and the plight of women in war is something that has been desperately under-focused in the long 1900s, in the long 20th century, and I think I've had the pleasure of spending time individually with all these three candidates. The only thing that I feel is it saddens me a little bit is that each of the laureates are such wonderful and inspiring human beings that each and every one of them would have deserved the podium all to themselves. But I do think that when the decision was made to take three representatives, were the representatives of an agenda, these were, I think they were very inspiring laureates, and that they have continued to do very good and inspiring work.
Thank you. Time is running out, but I will take a few more questions, and then I will turn back to Asle. But since we have very little time left, please be disciplined and short.
Oh, you noticed. You noticed. Yeah, I was hoping I was going to... Listen, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the Nobel Peace Prize to President Obama. All I can do is refer you to, admittedly, the short statement made by the Nobel Committee when awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to President Obama, where they focused on President Obama's desire and stated objective of changing the tone and the focus of international politics, which is obviously important from the leader of the most powerful country in the world. It was also noted his Prague speech foreshadowing a renewed emphasis on nuclear disarmament. History will tell how the Peace Prize to President Obama will be judged. I notice that there are a great many people who are skeptical, as you are. But for me, my job is to stand and be loyal to the Nobel Committee, which I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I've closed my list, but before I closed my list, I saw a couple of hands. The lady on my left here.
Thank you very much. This has been very enlightening, and I appreciate it. One small question for you is, do you feel you will have an obligation for, let's take Aung San Suu Kyi, her behavior and so on. So you could not take back the award, but do you think you have some guidelines to tell them how to behave? After all, you gave it to them for peace. So when they're doing something like what she is doing, don't you think you feel obligated for the sake of the reputation of the award? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this...
I'm supposed to tell you who I'm Sawa Cater with the International Federation for Peace and Sustainable Development. Thank you.
Thank you again. So I think this is the last question from the floor. I took note, by the way, that you didn't address my inappropriate and unfair question. I gave you 5 minutes.
Really, you know, like, okay. Since I'm going to be unfair to you. I'm not going to. What I'm going to do? I'm not going to tell you my least favorite Peace Prize. I'm going to tell you my favorite Peace Prize. Okay, all right.
Good.
My favorite Peace Prize, 1936, Carl von Ossietzky. 1936. Hitler is in power in Germany. He's imprisoning political opponents on a huge scale. The Nobel Committee gets the biggest number of nominations in its history for the German Social Democrat and newspaper man Carl von Ossietzky. Carl von Ossietzky is by this stage imprisoned in a concentration camp. This is a controversial award. In 1935, the committee blows up. The committee has two. It has a present Norwegian foreign minister and the past Norwegian foreign minister, and the committee it disintegrates. Both of the foreign ministers leave the committee. They feel that this is a bridge too far. You know, this is high politics. New members come in and they award the Peace Prize to Carl von Ossietzky in 1936. Norway, this is the first of the empty chair Peace Prizes. This was an award, and when reading the consultant reports on Carl von Ossietzky, it makes me just so proud to have been a Nobel, to be in their tradition, because the consultants saw something that a lot of people didn't see, the inhumane face of this Nazi regime being a threat to mankind itself. And the consultants urging the committee, it's very strong language. The last consultant report ends up saying, you have to show some spine now, because if you don't, no one will. Well, the committee showed some spine. Norway was sanctioned by Nazi Germany. Carl von Ossietzky had his health broken in the concentration camps, was released just before he died. A great tragedy. Carl von Ossietzky had, by the way, been the newspaper man who put in print that Nazi Germany was breaching the Versailles Treaty and was on the way with a huge rearmament for war. This is my favorite award. I think it was a award. I think it was the right award. And I think it's an award that deserves to be revisited in the history of the Nobel Peace Prize. So, Terje, this is because Sawa Kader, when it comes to the obligations, yes. No, it's not that kind of party. We don't give the Nobel Peace Prize and then says, well, and madam or sir, can you please sit down here and sign this rules of future conduct that we don't. We try to select laureates that have done a great effort for peace in the past. We certainly hope they will continue to do so in the future. But I don't see it would be even a good idea to go down that path. The issue of Aung San Suu Kyi, and this is an important point here. Speaking as an academician, and it's a lot of smart people here in the room. Do you think that stripping Aung San Suu Kyi for the Peace Prize would be a greater problem for Aung San Suu Kyi than being a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and facing these kind of criticisms? I think in many ways, I think that the Nobel Peace Prize, if anything, intensifies the criticisms against Aung San Suu Kyi. I have to tell you, I don't know this any more than I read in the newspapers. I don't have any privileged information. I've read the UN reports about the situation, the Rohingya situation. I read the criticisms against Aung San Suu Kyi, and I noticed that in every single time she is singled out for criticism, the Nobel Peace Prize is mentioned, and maybe that is, a point worth mentioning as well. That's all I can say about that. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real pleasure to be spending this time with you here today. If any of you have any more questions, I'll linger a little and we can have a bit of a chat. Terje, I'll give the closing remarks to you.
Before I close, and thank you, I should apologize for my inappropriate question, but I have to tell you that a while ago I was seated beside a very long time serving head of state, and I asked the person the question, who was your best prime minister? And the person turned to me after a while and said, that's a very inappropriate question, but I would like you to ask me another question. So I said, yes. You can ask me who was my worst prime minister, and I will answer. And the person did. But I say no more. I think this has been terrific. You've been great. I think you've given us a very comprehensive overview of the past, present, and future. I think you've told us a great story about a great institution. And I think you've shared with us some very entertaining anecdotes. So I think we are enlightened. I think we know a lot more about this important prize than we did before we came to this room. So the only thing which remains for me is to thank you. I actually I'm sitting here thinking, I think we have to repeat it maybe next year.
Well, I certainly hope so. We were having drinks last night, and I was thinking, wow, it's not so often I have a chance to talk with somebody who's so knowledgeable about what is going on in world affairs. Like I felt this great pressure that, yes, Norway is really quite a bit out of the way. Terje, you have to invite me more often.
Let's talk about that afterwards. I think we can make a deal. Look, I think we should give Asle a very big round of applause, and I wish to thank you all for having been with us.